The story goes that when Lee Radziwill first set foot on a theatre stage, a strange silence fell over the audience, as if they sensed the potent legacy surrounding her even before she uttered a word. This quiet was partly due to curiosity. Was this Jacqueline Kennedy's younger sister, the former First Lady of the United States, attempting to make her own mark in the arts? But there was also an underlying anticipation, a question of whether Lee herself could ever truly step out of the immense shadow cast by the Kennedy fame. This lesser-known chapter of Lee's brief foray into acting in the mid-1960s speaks volumes about her lifelong pursuit, a persistent effort to shape and polish her own identity within a world saturated by politics, celebrity, riches, and heartbreak. Throughout her life, Lee fluidly adopted various roles: a chic socialite, a princess through marriage, an interior decorator, an author, a muse to prominent figures like Truman Capote, and perhaps most significantly, a quietly determined survivor of the sorrows that plagued her renowned family. Caroline Lee Bouvier, later known as Lee Radziwill, was born on March 3, 1933, into a world of high social status and complex family relationships. Her parents, John Vernou Black Jack Bouvier III and Janet Norton Lee, were both part of the East Coast elite, but their marriage was fraught with financial tension and personal difficulties, leading to a divorce when Lee was quite young. In 1942, Janet married Hugh D. Auchincloss Jr., bringing the Bouvier sisters, Jackie and Lee, into a larger blended family. The early 20th century was defined by the Great Depression, followed by the turmoil of World War II. While the Bouvier had lost a portion of their wealth in the stock market crash, Lee and Jackie never experienced true hardship. They benefited from riding lessons, finishing schools, European trips, and the appearance of a sophisticated lifestyle, privileges well beyond what most Americans could afford at the time. However, the most influential aspect of Lee's early years wasn't just the allure of high society, but her almost unbreakable connection with her older sister, Jacqueline, who was 4 years her senior. To outsiders, they appeared very much alike, with the same dark hair, graceful demeanor, and poised posture from finishing school. Yet from a young age, Lee saw that her sister had a magnetic quality that captivated nearly everyone. Jackie was the accomplished equestrian, the avid reader, the quiet intellectual who was also modestly charming. And although Lee herself was intelligent, witty, and had her own social graces, Jackie was the one who initially drew the spotlight. Privately, Lee sometimes struggled with feeling overshadowed, but she also deeply admired her sister, sharing with her teenage crushes, dreams of exciting adventures, and the unease of living in a family that was both tightly bonded and fragmented by divorces and remarriages. In the post-war era, the two sisters were launched into a new American high society. Jackie studied at Vassar and the Sorbonne, while Lee, like her sister before her, was educated at Miss Porter's school. At the age of 20, in 1953, ironically the same year Jackie married John F. Kennedy, Lee married Michael Canfield. Her marriage to Canfield, a publishing executive rumored to have an obscure lineage, some whispered he might be the unacknowledged son of Prince George, Duke of Kent, took her to London. There, she plunged into the aristocratic circles that defined Britain's post-war high society, building friendships with nobles, artists, and intellectuals. However, this marriage was not to endure. By the late 1950s, Lee had divorced Canfield. She soon married Stanislas Stas Radziwill, a Polish prince in exile who worked as a real estate broker in England. Consequently, in 1959, she became Her Serene Highness Princess Lee Radziwill, a title that would stay tied to her identity long after this second marriage concluded. During this time, Lee observed her sister rise to the pinnacle of power and fame when John F. Kennedy became president in 1961. Jacqueline Kennedy, as First Lady, transformed the White House into a symbol of youth, glamour, and cultural refinement. Lee often visited Washington, D.C., frequently staying overnight at the White House, hosting events, or joining Jackie at official functions overseas. The sisters kept a close, confiding relationship. Jackie might seek Lee's opinion on fashion, while Lee would share her personal concerns. At times, however, tensions surfaced. The disparity in their positions, Jackie as a central figure in American politics, and Lee as the fashionable younger sister residing in Europe, led to moments of strain. Some of Lee's friends remembered her being conflicted between her pride in Jackie's success and a desire to be recognized for her own merits. This underlying tension would influence their relationship for many years. A significant, though less publicized, turning point in Lee's life happened around 1962 when she volunteered with U.S. cultural envoys touring Asia. She felt a pull towards philanthropy and a desire to engage in meaningful work, particularly considering the gravity of her sister's global responsibilities. Although often eclipsed by Jackie's official tours and prominent visits, Lee discreetly assisted in organizing events that promoted educational opportunities for women and children in several countries. A Red Cross volunteer who collaborated with her then later recounted how Lee could enter a crowded room and immediately make people feel comfortable, commending her sincere interest in their personal narratives. This talent was seldom acknowledged by American tabloids, which focused more on her fashion choices or her princely marriage. Yet it hinted at Lee's capacity to use her social charm and empathy for philanthropic and cross-cultural endeavors, an element of her life that never received the recognition it merited. Then, the devastating event that shook the entire nation occurred. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963. For Lee, it was more than a national tragedy. It was a deeply personal family nightmare. Jackie lost her husband, and Lee lost a brother-in-law she had grown to admire not just as a charismatic political figure, but also as a friend. The entire Bouvier family was engulfed in shock and sorrow. Lee immediately flew to Washington to support Jackie, consoling her sister through the most challenging days of public grief. A lesser-known personal story from this time, shared by one of Lee's friends, described how she barely left Jackie's side for 2 weeks, even sleeping on the floor of Jackie's bedroom, prepared to wake at any moment to offer comfort. This picture of Lee as a devoted caregiver sharply contrasts with the more superficial party girl princess image often painted by gossip columns. However, life's sorrows can sometimes lead to unforeseen chances. In the mid-1960s, as Lee sought emotional healing, she decided to try acting, spurred on by friends in the arts. Some sources suggest Truman Capote, who was very fond of her, encouraged this move. Lee accepted a role in a stage play. The media reaction at the time was brutal, portraying her as a dilettante or an intrigued amateur who believed her famous name could compensate for a lack of formal training. In reality, Lee was arguably as prepared as many other aspiring actresses of that period. But with a last name, or a sister's last name, carrying so much weight, critics attacked, often disparaging her acting before she had a chance to develop her skills. Perhaps it was partly her own error in judgment to choose such a public platform when her image was already under intense scrutiny. The greater tragedy, though, was that she never had the chance to fully investigate what could have been a true passion. Following a few unenthusiastic reviews, she left the stage, a victim of the tabloids' keenness to portray her as the inferior Bouvier who failed to live up to her sister's legendary status. Despite this disappointment, Lee's life in the late 1960s and 1970s maintained an air of social sparkle. She was a muse to numerous designers, including Giorgio Armani, Valentino, and Yves Saint Laurent, who admired her slender physique, flawless taste, and innate fashion sense. Truman Capote famously called her one of his swans, a group of elegant women who moved in the highest circles of New York and European society. Concurrently, her marriage to Stas Radziwill became strained. They had 2 children, Anthony and Christina, but the demands of incessant travel, social obligations, and rumored affairs put a heavy burden on their relationship. As JFK's tragic death had demonstrated, no level of privilege could protect the Bouvier or Radziwills from sorrow. By 1974, Lee divorced Stas. Though they went their separate ways, they maintained a polite, if somewhat detached, relationship for their children's sake. A seldom mentioned period in Lee's life includes her work with documentary filmmakers Albert and David Maysles in the early 1970s. Initially, Lee proposed to the Maysles brothers the idea of a film about her cousin, Edith Bouvier Beale, and aunt, Edith Ewing Bouvier Beale, who resided in a decaying mansion named Grey Gardens in East Hampton. Lee's goal for the film was to showcase her attempts to better her relatives' living situation. However, as filming went on, it became apparent that the unvarnished, unfiltered reality of their lives was both heartbreaking and captivating. Lee eventually stepped away from the project, which was released in 1976 as Grey Gardens. The movie became a cult favorite, shedding light on the poignant seclusion and quirky appeal of the Beales. If Lee hadn't started the project, the Grey Gardens story might never have entered public awareness so strikingly, an accidental yet enduring cultural impact. Tragedy struck again in 1968 with Robert F. Kennedy's assassination, and yet again in 1975 with the murder of her former brother-in-law, Aristotle Onassis's stepson. The entire Kennedy sphere appeared to be constantly under a cloud of grief. However, arguably the most profound personal loss for Lee was the death of her son, Anthony, from a rare cancer in 1999. Anthony Radziwill had grown up near his cousin John F. Kennedy Jr., developing a close relationship that withstood public scrutiny. As an adult, Anthony became an Emmy Award-winning television producer for ABC News. His illness was a protracted struggle, during which Lee seldom left his bedside. Friends depicted her as a pillar of strength, dedicating all her maternal energy to making his final months as filled with love and dignity as possible. Anthony passed away at 40, just weeks after his cousin John Jr.'s fatal plane crash. For Lee, it was a devastating string of losses. In subdued interviews, she hinted at the immense pain of losing her child, remarking that some griefs become an indelible part of one's being. Yet, Lee Radziwill's ability to endure and reinvent herself was extraordinary. Although she never fully emerged from the shadow of Jackie's legacy, she established herself as an interior designer and consultant, earning admiration for her flawless taste. She took on design projects in both the United States and Europe, creating a style that combined European elegance with a distinct American ease. Magazines like House and Garden showcased her work, lauding her sophisticated yet inviting designs. In a 1975 interview, she discussed the significance of bringing warmth to a space, a sentiment that appeared to reflect her own life's aim, to introduce light into areas darkened by sorrow. She also penned a memoir, Happy Times, published in 2001, which was filled with pictures and stories centered on the happy moments of her life rather than the tragedies that had defined it. While critics may have viewed it as an incomplete account, readers gained a glimpse into a woman who endeavored to hold on to fleeting, beautiful moments, parties, get-togethers, shared smiles, amidst profound sorrow. Inevitably, controversies arose concerning Lee's personal life. One rumor that reportedly caused tension was the assertion that Aristotle Onassis had initially been interested in her, not Jackie, and that Jackie's marriage to Onassis in 1968 led to a significant falling out between the sisters. Another wave of gossip concerned Lee's brief affair with the renowned photographer Peter Beard, known for his unconventional and daring lifestyle, a sharp departure from the sophisticated Radziwill world. While some sources claim Lee and Beard did have a passionate affair, others downplay it as an overstatement. Lee herself seldom commented on these rumors publicly, opting for a tactful silence that, ironically, often sparked more conjecture. Regarding family strains, there were insinuations that Lee felt unappreciated by the Kennedys, a family so engrossed in public affairs and sorrow that personal connections were frequently eclipsed by political duties and intense media attention. Why is Lee Radziwill's story important beyond mere celebrity chatter? Firstly, her life highlights the challenges of creating one's own identity when a sibling is an international figure. In a 2013 interview, Lee stated, "I was always asked about Jackie. I never understood why people found that interesting," suggesting a blend of slight annoyance and weary acceptance that she would always be viewed in relation to her sister. Secondly, she represents a generation of post-war American women who experienced the societal changes of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, adopting travel, pursuing careers, and juggling personal aspirations with societal norms. Lee's divorces, her efforts to establish a professional foothold in arts, fashion, and design, and her charitable activities mirror a changing environment for privileged women, demonstrating that even affluence and social ties couldn't insulate them from emotional upheavals or the drive for constant self-renewal. Furthermore, Lee's participation in cultural endeavors, though often overlooked, had lasting impacts. The Grey Gardens documentary, which she initially set in motion, became a landmark in American documentary filmmaking, affecting subsequent generations of directors. Her intimate friendships with leading artistic figures also influenced elements of 20th century style and dialogue. Truman Capote, for example, valued Lee's viewpoint, at one point describing her as the definition of taste in a disordered age. While this may be an exaggeration, it underscores the subtle influence she had in connecting creative circles across Europe and the United States. Lee Radziwill passed away on February 15, 2019, at 85 years old in New York City. Her death was reported in the media, but it was invariably presented in the context of her sister. Jacqueline Kennedy's younger sister dies at 85. This appeared to be a conclusive reinforcement of the story that had shadowed her since birth. The world was consistently more captivated by Jackie. However, eulogies from friends, designers, and close associates offered a more detailed portrayal. A woman of grace, strength, and kindness, a hostess renowned for memorable dinner parties in her Paris residence, a mother who cherished her children and never fully healed from Antony's death, and a steadfastly devoted friend. As a controversial figure, Lee's detractors highlight her inherited advantages, her lavish way of life, and a perceived remoteness from everyday difficulties. But a closer look reveals a more human narrative, that of an individual who grappled with sorrow, endeavored to forge her own unique way, and faced both competition with her sibling and the unceasing pressures of high society. She is reported to have said in a thoughtful moment, "When you are seen as a reflection of someone else, you spend your life trying to see yourself clearly." This statement, whether true or not, deeply aligns with the course of her entire existence. Regarding historical impact, Lee Radziwill's story may not have carried the direct political weight of her sisters. She didn't influence foreign policy or redesign the White House, but she did enrich the cultural fabric of her time by connecting European and American preferences in design and fashion, by backing documentary cinema, and by cultivating relationships with creative individuals. She served as an understated channel for 20th century style and discourse. Moreover, her role within the broader Kennedy circle was significant. She occasionally acted as a go-between, a trusted friend, and a signal that beneath the political exterior was a genuine family with authentic feelings. This aspect of personal genuineness is important for grasping the larger narrative of the Kennedys and their associates, who were often idolized as American royalty, yet experienced the same private sorrows as any other family. Lee Radziwill's life story, therefore, stands as evidence of the quiet strength of personal transformation amidst tragedy, the search for beauty as a comfort, and the unbreakable ties of family, even when those ties bring both unmatched happiness and a persistent, subtle feeling of being overshadowed. In her own words, she once remarked, "Happiness is the pursuit of small joys, looking around and finding the grace notes in daily life." This viewpoint seems to aptly summarize her legacy, at times eclipsed, but never completely faded, and always with quiet resolve carving out her own distinct journey. And that's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to smash that like button, drop us a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss our new content. Thanks for watching.